for delivery of State Highway long-term business case, and I'd like him to confirm that. And then when I look down on that on-site progress, we're looking at our first new home starting 2025. I want to know how realistic that is, because I suspect it's not at all. I suspect we're probably talking 2027, possibly 2028. And if Doug was on the call, he'd be putting his head in his hands, I'm sure. So can we get that confirmed, and whether any attention has been paid to that timeline down the bottom, please?
Thank you, Ian. Doug is on the call, but his camera's off, so we can't see if his head is in
his hands.
David, you want to
Yeah,
respond?
okay. So to that question, and the long-term business case anticipate middle of next year for completion.
Yep.
But construction funding not in the next 10 years.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that needs to be shown here somewhere, because it looks like, you know, it's all go, 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 but actually it's not. And I think, David, we're even talking a staged delivery of that when we do get to construction.
Yes, very likely.
Yeah.
But remember, there's a short term and there's a long term. Long term, outside 10 years, the short term works as have always been planned. So business case next year, enabling works, well, that's already, you know where that's sitting.
Yeah. Thank you, David. I mean, the second leg of Anne's question went to the timing for building a first house. I'm wondering whether that falls to Marty or to someone else to address.
So Marty knows the answer, I think.
Yeah. Well, Christine, are you able to talk to the enabling works and the time frame as we understand it at the moment? And then, David, you can perhaps assist.
Yep. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Yes. So, yeah, just picking up on the conversation. So, yes, the physical works for the transporter in two parts. And I think Anne was talking short term and David was talking long term. So I think there were two different conversations going at the same time. So in terms of the short term enabling works, that is going to be in two phases. And our understanding of those phases is such that they won't be physically completed in enabling houses till about 2027. So I think that's the point that Anne is raising. Because of the timelines that are required to actually get land acquired, which currently everything is happening in sequence rather than parallel. And probably the question for us to challenge ourselves is, given the level of urgency around our housing supply, are there opportunities to look at rephrasing or speeding up the delivery of the transport infrastructure to open up the land in this area?
Jess, Andrew here from Waka Kotahi, just jumping on that. Well, given we're working very closely with TCC, who've led the business case on this and are involved in preparing the program for these works, I'd expect you know the answer to that, CJ, but absolutely that is exactly what we are doing at the moment, is looking to run all the work streams in parallel to accelerate delivery, to bring that forward as fast as possible.
Thank you.
So that's all very reassuring, Peter, but how is that going to be reflected here? Because I think that's the underlying question. I'm delighted to hear Jess say that we are going to be working in parallel, because it all seems to me to be consecutive, and when you add that all up, we're out in 2027. If we can speed that up, how do we then show that, and who is updating this on-site sort of timeline down the bottom that says we're going to start doing earthworks and building starting in 2024-25?
So, and that will go back to the Priority Development Areas Working Group that is overseeing the compilation of all of these as a project that sits inside Tauranga City. Marty and the team will be in the lead of that, and I think the action from today is to refer this back to the collective officials to confirm their ability to deliver homes in 2025.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm asking is to enhance this program, because this is supposed to be telling us how it's all going. We really need that timeline of delivery. So what we're getting is good information on all the stuff that needs to happen and who's doing it. But the timelines are really critical, because that's where we see what we're actually talking about when we're talking about building houses. And I mean, I'm just focused on Tauriko West. It probably it applies right across the board.
Thank you, Anne. Ernst, have you got a...
Just quickly, yes, thank you. So, so these sheets are updated, you know, as we said, was updated last week for this meeting through the growth area lead. So, but just to pick up Commissioner Tolley's point, we were reluctant at this point to change the program as it was understood until very recently. We're very aware of the risks, and they've flagged them very clearly in the report, including at the front around the funding availability and the need to integrate. So those are highly, but you know, Marty's arranged a series of very senior executive meetings across this public sector to address this very point. And there's also been very constructive meetings between CIP, Kainga Ora, Whakakutahi to make sure we land on that integrated package. So there's quite a lot of activity there, but too early and probably not appropriate to walk away from the 2025 target at this point. That would be giving up too early.
Peter, perhaps if I can comment on the conversations that we're having with the range of different agencies around particularly the IAF funding application relating to Tauriko. I think once we get through those conversations and align all of the funding and get commitment from all the parties, and we're anticipating that will happen probably towards the end of March, April next year, I think we need in those conversations to be conscious of the timelines and expectations of everybody to try and have houses starting to be built in 2025. And so we'll need to have that in mind as we talk about the funding and the program.
Thank you, Marty.
So maybe what we're needing are some critical success points. So just so that from that governance point of view, we're all conscious that, you know, we're all aware of when those are actually ticked off and what effect that's having on our processes and time.
Yes, Anne. Let me ponder what we might do with that idea.
Yep.
Let's just go to Councillor Nees and then Chairman Leader.
Well, thank you. Fabulous report, really very, very helpful. I had one question, and it's to do with the number 9 on page 15, where we there was some work on the Bell Block and an agreement to reflect that in the program as a private sector-led other growth area. Now, I didn't see that in that other area section of the report, so I presume that's going to be added. But my question is, how do we track those projects? Because, for example, the Bell Block is very low-lying. We have consultation occurring with the Kaituna Catchment Advisory Group, the flood scheme advisory group there, who would be affected by any development in Bell Block. They're already concerned that their levels of service are unable to be met for their flood scheme because of the water coming in from Papamoa residential development. So I assume the private developers are doing the feasibility and the planning, but how do we keep visibility of those potential risks that might be in the background? We need to make sure that the private developers are linked up with the right people to ensure the real issues that they're going to have to deal with if they're planning that development.
Thank you, Councillor Nees. I mean, my understanding of Bill Block is where we've all got to is to recognise that there will be, or we expect there to be, a private plan change associated with that, and that we need to be aligned in the way that we respond to the private plan change to ensure that we address all of the issues that you have identified and others. But that Bell Block is not part of the SmartGrowth formal program. It's not a SmartGrowth initiated thing. It's how do we respond to a private plan change thing, which is what 9 is attempting to say. Okay, Doug.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me, Peter?
Yes.
Oh, great. Yeah, I am here, Commissioner Tolley. And apologies for being late. I've been negotiating the remedial works on State Highway 29. So you may have covered this, but I just wanted to raise issues raised on page 14 and 15, which is issues that CAG addressed. And one of the ones on here, and sorry, backtrack, I do have my hand in my head in my hands in terms of a commissioning date for houses in 25. Yeah, because reading the papers, there's cost escalations, etc., etc. But anyway, getting back to the point, I think one of the issues that I'd like some more explanation around is the catchment-related issues in terms of potable water supply, essentially the Waiari scheme, because both Commissioner Tolley and Mayor Webber have raised it with me. And whilst a lot of the other infrastructure stuff we can control, and it's becoming a funding and financing issue, I haven't been anyone yet who can control the water, the weather and the water. But to me, this is a pretty fundamental issue that your interpretation of what is the medium term, is it within 5 years? Because I think we really need some thinking about this. And if the core water supply is not going to meet the demand, then discussions about where the alternatives should be starting now. And whilst there are some, they will all involve capital and a long lead-in times in terms of getting raw supply to the Waiari processing plant. So are the CAG group over this, Peter, in terms of what the next steps are?
So yes, and Doug, I'm wondering if we can pick that up under item 13 on
Oh, sorry. Yep, fine.
There's someone from the Tauranga team with their hand up, or is that a hangover?
No, it's not a hangover. It's Bill here, Peter. And just really pleased how this is developing, and in particular, I really like in terms of that what CAG are up to and what they've addressed, and picking up, I think, Gary's earlier point in terms of the escalation provision. I think that's extremely important. I just wanted to make an observation though, and having been involved in these types of things for a long period of time, and I'm not being critical of the work done to date, but it is important we get the good oil, and that is the good, the bad and the ugly. Now, this is in public. There may be some things though, and I just want to make the point, that might then need to be covered off in PX, so we can actually have a good discussion around the partners where there are particular issues. So I just wanted to put that on the table and to make sure that that opportunity, or make it known, is there. So that, and I'm not saying that would be taken up every meeting, but it just provides an opportunity, particularly maybe some of those gnarly issues that we have to work through as a partnership, where we do need to have some unencumbered and free and frank discussions. Apart from that, good work in terms of Ernst and the team of getting this update to where it is today.
Thank you. I've just been reflecting on the challenge that Commissioner Tolley laid down around whether we've got the critical path lined up to achieve our expected on-site progress. And I'm wondering whether the way that we might deal with that is to request SEAG to confirm that the critical path required to achieve intended on-site progress for each of these is achievable, or something like that.
Yeah.
As a way forward. I've got a hand up from Western Bay.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Gary Weber here again. I raised the word escalation deliberately, and if I can take everybody to page 21, there's a little red dot there around Amakoroa. We have had notice from the Minister that our request for the fast process for Amakoroa Stage 3 has been approved. So we'll be pushing that through very quickly. Just reminding everybody in terms of shovel ready, this is the SmartGrowth one that's ready to go now. We can build houses. In fact, we're doing it in Amakoroa on a daily basis. Coming to the red dot where we really, this is an escalation issue. Western Bay has tried incredibly hard, and sorry, David Spears, this is not intended to shoot you, but don't take it diplomatically, as I can put it. We are not being encouraged by some of the wording we're getting that actually full interchange at Amakoroa is going to be delivered as per, the promises, many of which we have had the rug pulled from underneath us. The reason this isn't here is we are led to believe we are up against it, getting this through, and having to ask ourselves the hard question: why would we continue to build more houses as one hand of government saying do it quickly, get off your backside, but the other hand, or one of the agencies saying, well, not too sure we could fund the infrastructure. This was supposed to go in back in the early 2000s. Bill knows the detail because he did the designation, but we're still hanging on tenterhooks on whether we're going to get what is sensible for Amakoroa. And it comes back to Anne's point. If these things are not going to happen, then the agencies need to come out and tell us sooner rather than later, because we've gone to the Minister hoping that what we were led to believe was a possibility may not be a possibility now from the transport side, but in terms of Minister Parker, we have really lent on him and he's met our request to give part process. So we're between a rock and a hard place here on what's going to happen.
Thank you, Gary. David, rather.
Yeah, look, perhaps I can respond really categorically, as I think I have done multiple times already. There is no full interchange at Amakoroa in the 10-year funding window for Kotahi. No matter how we jig the funding that is or isn't available, at best, there is an opportunity to create some safe intersection facilities at Amakoroa, and that's the conversation we've been desperately bending over backwards to try and progress with anyone who's got any money, including our Minister, in terms of can we divert money from other parts of the funding pot. I mean, I don't have the soundtrack, but Mission Impossible is not far from where we are, and I can only but regret the fact that things have gone the way they have. But at best, we are looking at whether we can manipulate some of the safe improvement program, safety infrastructure program, that will get us nowhere near a full interchange in Amakoroa, even with other investment.
Yeah, David, I hear you, and I hear you clearly. Where we're coming from and where we've escalated this is beyond NZT or Waka Kotahi. Where I'm coming from is the Minister has made it clear there is $150 million in the NZ Up program for route security and designations on stage 2. And we're saying use that money to give us what is possible and get some, as much as you can, out of Waka Kotahi. We're not saying the whole lot. We're asking him to seriously look at it because he's made it very clear. There's $150 million in the NZ Up program for route security and designations. Where we're coming from, if you don't secure the Amakoroa end, you've got to ask some hard questions. Why the hell you would 4-lane from Te Puna to Amakarawa. And so that's why it's going wider than Waka Kotahi. It's what do we need to do to get to these ministers of transport and housing to say, hey, you got to deliver both. Now, Western Bay's invested over 100 million in here, has done for quite some time. We're building the houses. It's about the, Papamoa is going well, I accept that. But Amakarawa is the area where we can start building houses almost immediately on top of stage 1 and 2, which is in progress right now.
Yep, Kpi, I think we're on the same page there that this is a ministerial decision. It's the minister's decision, completely out of our hands, and for what it's worth, we're doing what we can with the budget. We have got the ability to manipulate to whatever extent we can to support you guys.
Yes, I hear that, David, but what I'm asking is, what is the SmartGrowth leadership group? What can we do to get in front of those ministers, either, well, it'll be early in the new year before they make decisions on the IAF, that, hey, we really want you to seriously look at that 150 million, because Western Bay's tried hard, but I'd like to think that we could put some sort of delegation of the tangata whenua representative, the chair of the regional council, the chair of the commission, and the independent chair of SmartGrowth, get in front of those ministers to say, hey, we're desperate here and really want you to seriously consider how you allocate that 150 million from the NZ Up program.
So, Gary, was that a draft resolution?
I'm more than happy to move it, yes, and I'm sure one of my colleagues will second it to get it on the floor.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll second it.
Seconded by John Scribner.
Thank you. Are there any concerns or debate with respect to that, other than that Juanita probably hasn't got it written down? So perhaps, John, if you could assist in conveying the words to...
Where's the hand? Have I muted it? What have I done?
No,
we can hear you, Anne.
Oh, right. Look, I absolutely support where Gary's coming from, and it must be just so frustrating for him. And I think we all, we all understand the issues, but we've got, from SmartGrowth, we have put in that IAF application, which has passed through the first stage. So why would we be then coming in over the top of that? I'm just questioning the timing, Gary, not the support. We supported you. I think SmartGrowth supported you right across the board with the IAF. We've put in our proposals. They've passed the first gate. Why would we want to be interfering with that early in the new year? That's my only question.
Well, the problem is we actually didn't get through the gate, Anne. We've been advised the 150 million out of IAF is not going to happen. So if we don't get 150 out of the IAF, and Waka Kotahi has got no money.
I thought it had gone through to the next stage, Gary.
But yes, it has. But we've also been advised it's highly unlikely we'll get 150 million for a full interchange. And Waka Kotahi haven't got any money. So if there's going to be a shortfall, and that's why David's saying they're looking at suboptimal solutions now, right, to fit it through the pigeonhole. And there is going to be a gap. And what we're saying is use the NZ Up money.
Yeah, I understand all that. I just wonder about going down when we've already been talking about going down for, a much bigger package. Do we really want? Do we want to be reinforcing that IAF application and your motion to move into what is it, the up money, the New Zealand NZ Up money? Do we want to be reinforcing that rather than going and fronting up? Because we've got bigger fish we've been discussing to fry on a sub-regional deal. want to support you, but is that the right way to do it? Other than we could all write to the minister from SmartGrowth supporting it, but you know, I think we should think very carefully about how we use the delegation down there.
Well, we're just saying, please help. You
Yeah.
know, Western Bay has done it. We've been told it's highly unlikely, you know, and it's highly unlikely we'll get 150 million. We've been told that. So we're pragmatic enough, but you know, we really need to get, there's 150 million sitting out there. We've had conversations with the minister, but that's the Minister of Transport. But really, you know, Megan Woods is saying build houses, which we're doing.
So Gary,
so why don't we write? Wouldn't we be better to write from SmartGrowth direct to the minister with that proposition, saying that the whole of SmartGrowth supports that?
Well, sorry, with all due respect, we have moved the motion. We have moved the motion. I'm quite happy for you to put it. And if we fall on our face, we know where we stand.
Well, can I just suggest an alternative approach? SmartGrowth under delegations supported the IAF bid, and we've all been there. So it's not a question of whether SmartGrowth supports resolution of this or not. It's a question of the tactics of how we engage with government around trying to find a solution. So perhaps that's a conversation that is best left with the mayor, the chair of the commission, the chair of the regional council, and myself to figure out how we might best do that, rather than having a debate now about the tactics by which we give effect to SmartGrowth's support for Omokoroa.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that, Peter. It's, you know, we just really want to move it forward, and we just need some support.
So, Gary, if you're happy, I'm going to suggest that maybe you might want to withdraw your motion, and we'll just record an action item that the four of us will figure out how we work together to best support the resolution of the issues at Omokoroa.
I'm comfortable with that.
Thank you. David.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I think that's a very sound suggestion. I just perhaps highlight that we have done quite a bit of work, and I'm pretty confident we've shared this with Gary Ellis, on a range of costings. Suboptimal perhaps isn't the word I would choose, but in the order of $50 million will result in a good outcome at that site. 150 million, you know, we're not in the full diamond interchange park anymore, but you know, I just want to give you a sense of scale. This is not, you know, we don't necessarily need $150 million to knock this out of the park.
Thank you, David. So if we come to the end of that, I'm going to move in relation to this item that we receive the report, and we request SEAG to confirm that the critical path required to achieve on-site progress across the program is achievable. Do I have a seconder for that? Anne might want to do that. Thank you, Anne.
I'm happy to do that, Peter. Sorry, I was on mute.
Yeah, no, that's very good. Unless there's any further discussion, I will put the motion. All those in favour, please say yes.
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 To the contrary, no. It's carried. Thank you. That takes us to the end of item 8. And item 9 is the UFTI and TSP KPI monitoring presentation. And I think we're in your hands for this, Kelvin.
Hi, so change the topic. This is a brief presentation which I'll ask Craig Richards from Becker to run through. Just so you know, we've got a full report that's been to SEAG and has been updated for the next Senior Managers Group meeting. So it is coming to a head, but it's been a quick 4 weeks, I think, of the team around the traps in terms of central government agencies and the councils for Craig to pull this together. It's our first baseline report, if you like, on UFD and TSP KPIs. So it's a rear view mirror look at where things are at across the housing and transport and emissions dimensions, as well as an eye on the future with additional KPIs that we've proposed to include. So on that note, I think if we can let Craig take us through.
Right, thank you. Welcome, Craig.
Thanks, Kelvin. Yeah, kia ora koutou, everyone. Happy to be along. Can everyone see that all right? Do you want me to try and present the slides in a bigger format?
It's fine, Craig. Everyone has the slide pack.
Everyone's got the pack
anyway.
Cool. Okay, no worries. Yeah, so this Kpi Monitoring Framework, as I think you know, as Kelvin said, was a recommendation out of UFD to track outcomes monitoring from implementing projects. So it's all about our outcomes around housing, movement, environment, and prosperity. And we've pulled it together from the draft KPI that were in UFD, but also in TSP. So it's a bit of an amalgamation or a merge of KPI from those two strategic documents. If we can scroll down to the next slide there. Yeah, so we had some objectives at the start around having an easily accessible and understood framework for monitoring our KPIs to give us effective communication with SmartGrowth governance and independent monitoring, and that Waka Kotahi had comfort with the KPIs included and how it has been reported. We also, through this process, had some engagement with staff across the partner organisations, and we came up with some additional sort of objectives for the project about being relevant and realistic, you know, ensuring our data is easily obtainable. We didn't want to make this a hugely onerous process each year to go through this. We wanted to make sure our KPIs were aligned with sort of national aims and objectives, which I think we've achieved. If we scroll down again, we need to thanks. So the process, yes, Kelvin spoke about, fairly condensed across 4 weeks, involved taking the KPI that were in UFD and the TSP, reviewing all of those to see whether they still were relevant and aligned with our objectives. Some didn't. We excluded a small number primarily because they had been very difficult to obtain accurate data for, and I think we included a couple of new ones just to align closely with sort of current government objectives or monitoring. So we, after reviewing the KPI, we worked closely with the partner orgs, and a big thanks to all of the organisations, because it wouldn't have been achievable within the 4 weeks without the support that we had. We had a lot of requests for data to provide a picture on the KPIs, and this was all provided really promptly. So that we then compiled the data into a KPI framework, which is in the overview report. But we also produced an electronic dashboard for reporting in Power BI, where you can sort of click through all of the different KPI and the outcomes as we've found at the moment. And I'll give an example of that in a minute, and then obviously prepared the overview report as well. So if we can go down to the findings, Juanita, thanks. As I said, the findings here presented in the report in a sort of hard copy output of the framework, and also the Power BI dashboard. We really attempted to try and get historic data for all of the KPI, because I think it's really the trend over time that we're most interested in, to see where these outcomes are heading. It wasn't possible for all KPIs, but obviously being the first sort of compilation of data against these KPI, it'll only improve over time as we continue to monitor our outcomes. So if we go down again, Juanita, these are examples from the electronic dashboard. I haven't included all of them, but just some examples. They're in our sort of housing category. So this aligns with the UFD benefit that we're seeking around having the housing we need and we can afford. The different KPI in there around housing costs and rental costs, which you can see, dwelling densities, housing typologies, household income, and number of people on the housing register or the housing waiting list. No surprises there. I think everyone's aware that house prices have increased rapidly, very rapidly over the past few years. And if we go down to the next one, just another example from the housing category, the housing typology. So this is looking at the different the different types of dwellings that have been built. Still very dominated by single lot standalone houses, showing some increase in duplexes and I guess higher density type developments, which would be interesting and hopeful over time that higher density type developments beginning to show progress against that KPI. If we flick down to the movement one, so there was a number of KPI under movement around job accessibility, access to public transport and cycle facilities. So that's the number of dwellings within an accessible time to those facilities, crashes and bus use or public transport uptake. In regards to accessibility, obviously very dominated by car accessibility. So this is showing the number of jobs accessible within 30-minute travel time. And certainly most jobs accessible by car, certainly a lot higher than the other bus or cycle or walking. If we scroll down to the next one, an example, so the KPI for deaths and serious injuries on our roads for vehicles and for walking and cycling, unfortunately still a very high numbers and a trend, particularly for serious injuries, increasing over time and still obviously a very high number of deaths considering the impact and social impact costs those have on our communities. If we go down to the next one, I think it's around public transport uptake, PT patronage. Obviously had a drop, which I think everyone's aware of over time. We've shown some rebound in the more recent years around, I guess, when changes have been made to the services. We've seen bus accessibility increase with changes to services, and it'd be interesting to see how that tracks over time. Obviously, there's been more recent impacts from COVID and things like that might show up next time. If we go to the next one, there's a range of environment KPIs around emissions, mode share, access to green space, and amount of green space provided and access to open space. Again, no surprises. I think we all know that the mode share peak period very dominated by car travel and small amounts of use by walking and cycling and public transport. If we flick on to the next one, vehicle kilometres travelled by light vehicles. This has really increased since the data that we were able to obtain going back to 2006. Excuse me. And the proportion of EVs in our fleet is very low. It's about 0.5%. And obviously with VKT increasing and low levels of electric vehicle uptake, the corresponding outcome is emissions for transport emissions are also increasing. If we go down to the next one, the final set of KPI was around prosperity and travel times for freight mode share and travel times to key destinations, where we've looked at access to hospitals, doctors, intermediate, primary, secondary schools, supermarkets and tertiary education. You can't see them all there. It's just an example of the access to secondary schools, which encouragingly we have fairly decent access for cycling to secondary schools. But obviously car travel still dominates that accessibility. I think the last slide's actually a repeat of the previous one around access to schools. So just in summary, I think obviously the aim of this was to set up a monitoring framework so we can monitor over time outcomes from projects that have been implemented. No surprises, there's no real change, I think, from when UFTI was developed, because projects do take time to be delivered, but the important thing was establishing the framework for monitoring over time, and our recommendations around continuing to monitor. We've given recommendations on either monitoring annually or biannually. There's no need to monitor something if it's pretty clear that nothing's changed, and to use the framework to inform your decision making and maintain flexibility to include new KPI over the time. I think we've seen in the last year some quite significant change in government direction and what people are interested in. So we've got the ability to add or remove or adapt KPI over time to give the governance group a good picture of what's happening in our sub-region. So, yep, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. And certainly for me, that slide on vehicle kilometres travelled is a really interesting insight as to the scale of the challenge that's in front of us with the government's current consultation on emission reductions pathways, which is targeting a 20% reduction in vehicle kilometres travelled by light vehicles over the first couple or first 3 emission periods. So we're headed in entirely the wrong direction for that particular measure, and the scale of a 20% reduction is dramatic. So interesting times ahead. I have someone from the Western Bay group followed by someone from the Tauranga group.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Gary Weber here again. We've all had plenty of time to read this, so I'm quite happy to move the recommendations at the back end. This is for information, and leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Do I have a seconder for that? I think Councillor Nees has just done that, perhaps. Thank you. From the Tauranga team.
Thanks, Peter. It's Stephen here. I've been sort of thinking about this report and also our earlier report on the SmartGrowth program. And to me, the missing KPI and everything we're doing in the housing area is the actual number of houses that we have a certificate of completion on in relation to how many we should be delivering at prices people can afford. So there's kind of 2 things there. One is that, what is the gap between what we are supplying and what we should be supplying? And then the subset of that is, what is the gap between what we are supplying at various price points of affordability relative to what we need? That, after all, is the fundamental issue that we need to, all of our work in the housing space, and indeed to the extent that transport supports and enables housing, all of our work is designed to match supply and demand of housing in need. And yet, in all of our tables, we don't actually have a KPI that measures that particular outcome. We've got lots of measures that rate our performance on the contributing factors, but not the overarching outcome. And so I just would ask the working groups to consider that issue as to where is the appropriate place to put that. Is it in our overarching SmartGrowth performance monitoring framework, or is it in our UFTI? I don't really care, but I do think that that's a fundamental measure that we need to be keeping our eye on.
Thank you, Stephen. It might also provide an interesting byproduct of the number of houses that we think we've finished and those that actually have a code compliance certificate, which might be another interesting story all of its own.
Agreed.
But I'm sure we can refer that through, and maybe, Kelvin, if you want to respond to that before we go to Ron.
Yeah, I think that'd be good to capture that as an action, Stephen. The Becker work is obviously just based on what was in UFTI to start with, TSB. We will be working with the Housing Working Group as well as other working groups in SmartGrowth to add KPIs to this monitoring framework going forward. So, yeah, we can pick that up.
Thank you.
Ron.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for that. My question is around the use of the term KPI, which so in here you've got data, but when I think of KPIs, I think of where are we aiming for? And just to use an example, the housing typology on page 39, where there is a reduction in the number of standalone homes in Tauranga, for instance. But the interesting number, which is sort of squashed in the middle, is the squashed at the bottom, is the large numbers of smaller units. And so what is that telling us? And it may well be that it's about the older population who need, and then there's implications of that, you know, with the public transport, obviously access to health services, any other services for that matter. There's issues around community coherence. So if we've got large groupings of retirement age people, how are they integrating with young people or workers or whatever? And obviously there's leisure amenities. So what I'm saying is we've got data in this report, but it's not telling us the importance of the data. Is the KPI to have a reduction in standalone houses, or is that just information? Have you got any comment on that?
Yep. Thank you. Kelvin, have you got a response?
Well, there is, sorry, commentary in the full report, which we didn't put on the agenda today. It's quite long, but the idea is obviously construct narrative around what the story is around the KPIs. So
sorry, Calvin, it's duplicating.
Sorry, it's echoing.
Yeah.
I can mention if I sound all right. The full report does have desired trends against each of the KPIs. So these are the indicators, and we have a desired trend. What we don't have is targets for any of the KPI established at the moment. That might be a next stage, but I think there's a lot you can read into each of the KPI around what's causing it, and I think these provide a good discussion point for multiple facets of what could be influencing the indicators.
Thank you. I think I'll interpret that as this is a first blush. There will be more. Councillor Nees.
Thank you. This is great. Really good to see all this data pulled together. Where I was wondering is how this is going to be presented to us and how frequently are we going to get access to the dashboard? Are the public going to get access to the dashboard, or are we going to get a static report periodically to say this is the situation? And when we receive it, are we going to get some analysis or interpretation of the data? For example, the slide we've got in front of us there, we've got standalone housing going down. The assumption is that those are houses that have perhaps been bold to enable development of some of the more intensive housing. But some analysis about that and some commentary would be quite helpful, because it could be that those houses have just been taken out of the system and that land has not been developed. So just having a little bit of context and interpretation would be really helpful.
Thank you. Kelvin?
Yeah, we would draw on the housing and business assessment for some of that detail. In terms of future reporting, we would expect this, annually, and in some cases it will only be biannual on the KPIs. But what we need to do is set up the monitoring framework going forward so that we hit the right meetings, SLG meetings and CAG meetings next year.
And in terms of the access to the actual dashboard, I'm sure there'll be a bunch of licensing issues with who has access to Power BI that goes with that, and it's not entirely straightforward.
Yeah, although we do think most of the councils probably do have access at the moment.
Thank you. So we have a resolution that Mayor Webber moved, which are the recommendations that are set out at the end of this item. I'm happy to move for the process. It's a second, rather, in order to move that along. Is there any discussion around those? There being none, I'll put that. All those in favour, please say yes. Contrary, no. It's agreed. Thank you. Which takes us then to item 10 on the agenda. which was the addendum paper that was circulated separately, communications approach and key messages.
Peter, Gary, Weber, can we take that as read? It's just for information only, as is the following as well.
No.
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 I think you have the answer there, Gary. So, Kelvin, do you want to just introduce this briefly, and then I don't propose that we're going to spend a huge amount of time on this, but we do need to be comfortable with where this is at and what it is providing. Kelvin.
Yep. So this is the output from Wave Communications, which is based on contributions from the individual councils as well as.
Wave was they fit on this one.
Sorry, is that echoing around?
No, that's our Western Bay colleagues.
Okay,
using a conversation amongst themselves.
The idea, this is a platform for communications to be undertaken by council and occasionally central government partners that want to refer to smart growth and whatever projects or the context of projects and programs being undertaken by councils as well as under the umbrella of smart growth. So we're just trying to set up a basis for consistent communications. What Wave has produced is, a starting point, if you like, of some agreed base messages, some facts and figures, some projects currently underway being led by councils that are relevant to that growth story, but it does not attempt to go into being a communications campaign on its own by any means. It is really just a resource to use in communications being undertaken, whether it's with stakeholders or media publicity going forward.
Thank you, Kelvin. I've got our Tauranga colleagues first and then Western Bay.
Okay, it's Bill here, Peter. In my view, this needs substantial work to be undertaken on it in terms of some of the messaging, the lack of messaging in some places, and I certainly don't think it's actually telling the full comprehensive story. So I certainly, for my part, it's further work is required on that, and there's some key parts missing across the partnership. And the other thing I find interesting, the lack of acknowledgement of existing communities. And that's one thing that we found very clearly through our LTP process. So certainly I'd hate this to go anywhere further until that some of the shortfalls or gaps are addressed. And when I look at growing pains, for example, I'm sort of finding, well, where's all the business land commentary around that? So yeah, a number of issues that need to be worked through. And the other comment I'd make, and this may be something for the CEs to consider, I thought Campbell Squared were providing the strategic communications for smart growth. But I leave that for you, Peter, and the CEs to look at.
Thank you, Bill.
So Peter, what would be the process from here to contribute to this? I mean, I echo Bill's concern. When you just look at the description of our place, now, we know it's really important to acknowledge that iwi and hapu have been here for a long period of time. But, there's also a whole range of other communities living here. Tauranga City's just signed a memorandum of understanding with the Ministry for Ethnic Communities, and we've got 22% of our population who are born outside of New Zealand. I don't see them represented anywhere in here, and I certainly don't see, as Bill says, this is a huge emphasis on growth, but what about the existing people who are living here? So, the question I'm asking then is, how do we feed all this in? Because we don't want to talk about it today. I accept, you know, Gary's comment that we've all read it, but what do you want us to do to feed into, to make this right?
Thanks, Anne. So this product has been through about 3 workshops of the senior managers group. It's been through the chief executives group. It's been had substantial contributions made by Te and Alba and others in terms of how it addresses or reflects tangata whenua. I suppose I had hoped that through that process there was sufficient engagement back in each of the partners to ensure that the messages worked. Clearly that has not happened. If we need to go back and rework that, of course we can. I suppose the point that I would make is when we're at risk of just going round and round in circles trying to agree something that at the end of the day may or may not be helpful to any one of the partners in the way that they reflect their own communications. So it's not like this just came out of thin air. There's been a substantial amount of input from all of the officials of all of the partners and others in getting to this point.
I accept that, Peter. Maybe we should declare that we've had a similar problem with WAVE in dealing with TCC, is that they're not very good at picking up messages and translating them. And
I think it would be unfortunate to blame WAVE on this. This is a product of those that engaged in the process.
Well, no, it's come to governance, and governance are the ones normally that are dealing on a day-to-day basis with the public. And I can tell you from TCC, the governance is not happy.
That message is received and understood. And my sense is
we want to be constructive.
Rather than spending a whole lot of time going around the houses with this today, my sense is the right thing to do then is to send this back to chief executives with a request to ensure that appropriate engagement takes place with elected representatives and they are reviewed and refined.
Thank you.
I have Western Bay with their hand up.
Yes, thank you, Gary Webber here again. If you're going around the houses, miss us. I think we've got to be careful here. If you go onto the website, there are summaries of smart growth. There's the whole 9 yards of smart growth. There is documentation for forever. And what is the purpose of this document? You know, I just asked the question, why are we doing another one? It's a summary, but they want the detail. Go to the full documents. It's all there. So we're comfortable with whatever it is. I thought it was just take it as read and was for information only, but don't worry if you're going around the houses to give us a miss if it's okay with you.
Thank you, Gary. So the reason that this arose was a request from TSP for SmartGrowth to contribute to the communications effort that helps people understand the growth story and growth pressures in particular. And the response from officials has been to say, well, SmartGrowth is not going to lead its own communications and engagement program. That would be wrong. But what we could do was come to a view of consistent messages that agreed between the partners, so that wherever a partner is talking about the bigger picture, there are a set of agreed messages that go with it. If that is of no value, then we should not proceed any further. If there is value in that, then further refinement is clearly required.
Well, Peter, Gary, you just made the point. TSP requested this. Presumably they are the people that should be signing off. It wasn't a resolution from SmartGrowth, was it?
So it's all been dealt with through SEAG and staff, and because it made little sense to address the communications question solely with a transport focus, because a whole lot of the messages that we need to deliver go well beyond transport.
If I could just add, the communications plan, if you like, was also a stocktake report recommendation, which was adopted.
Okay. So my sense is we're just going to send this back to Chief Executives following this discussion, if everybody's comfortable with that action. I see nodding on the screens that I can see.
Yep. Yep.
Thumbs up on the screen. So thank you for that. On that basis, since we've been sat now for an hour and a half, that we just take a very short pit stop and leg stretch.
Yeah, communications is a pain in the ass.
Kelvin, you might want to turn off your microphone.
or not, we agree.
We don't disagree, Kelvin.
Moved, seconded.
Right, are we back, folks?
Yeah, we're here, Peter.
Excellent. You didn't go away.
We didn't go away.
No, you just need to hear the background. Yeah. So
we were reading this. Well, I was reading it last night.
Yeah.
Very good.
There is a story.
Reconvene. I think we are now on item 11, which is the quarterly report.
Yeah. I think that's because I turned it up yesterday. No, see.
Shall I get on?
It's on 23.
Right, I'll go and drop yours
online.
too.
Thanks. How wrong for sharing all of the air conditioning details with the rest of us. I'm going to move straight to the recommendations at the end of the quarterly report, rather than labour our way through it, because you've all had the opportunity to read it.
I'm quite happy to move the recommendations, Peter. Gary Webber.
Thank you, Gary. Do we have a seconder?
Happy to second, Peter. Stuart.
Thank you, Stuart. Is there any discussion about the recommendations?
Yes, there is, Peter.
Go, Bill.
Well, not so much a recommendation, but there have been previous discussions about looking at a sub-regional industrial land, doing some sub-regional industrial land work across the partnership. And I was just wondering, Kelvin, whether that has sort of arrived on your radar.
It is, insofar as we've covered it on page 51 of the agenda report in reference to the industrial/commercial/retail strategy. So we've definitely got that in our sights as a priority in the work program. I can't say I've seen anything recent, any recent work, but we are engaging with priority 1 around this topic.
Okay.
Thank you. Is there anything further? Stuart.
If I may, Chair, just with regard to the proposal joint spatial plan, which is on pause, which I agree, what's the thinking around integrating it with the new proposed legislation through the RM changes and that alignment rather than, you know, wasted work?
So go Kelvin.
Well, we think where we got to with JSP was, you know, it is valuable work that we will take into the future development strategy process. It may well be that we have to start the future development strategy, you know, sooner rather than later, and that would require work on an updated housing and business assessment in 2022, for example. But we also have to wait for what is happening with the RMA reform changes, and we know there's work going on in the National Planning Framework alongside that or as part of that. So the detail we'll have to wait and see over the next, you know, 6 to 8 months, I think, before we can be clearer about what is required for the FDS and anything else in terms of spatial planning.
And at the moment, our requirement is to continue to operate under the Resource Management Act, and we have an obligation to deliver a future development strategy under the NPSUD, and that takes us into a 2023 timeframe. So on the one hand, we know everything's going to change, and on the other hand, nothing has yet changed. I've got the crew at Western Bay, followed by Councillor Nees.
Thanks. I'm further to Stuart's comment. I'm mindful of that coming up there, but I think until we get an agreed template out of central government, we're just going to have to do as best we can, and then work out how we're going to transition from what we've got to the new template. And I think that's all we can do at this stage.
Thank you, Gary. Councillor Nees.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. We do have to wait and see what central government it comes up with. But I reflect that the last full review of the strategy was 2013, and an awful lot has changed since then. So I do hope that we're doing some thinking about a project plan for developing the joint spatial plan, because we don't want to be rushing it. We want something other than just a focus on housing. It needs to be about livable communities and the wider environmental well-beings and social well-beings, as opposed to just numbers of houses. Can I give you an example of what's changed significantly since 2013, and that's the Mount Mononui air quality issue. So some of these are bubbling away in the background, and we need to be prepared to be pulling work through on that into the joint spatial plan. So I do hope that maybe at the next meeting, we get some sort of picture of how we're going to be developing a project plan and when we're going to start doing the work for the joint spatial plan, and the sort of gaps that we're going to have to fill.
Thank you. I'm sure that will be addressed in the work program as it's developed. I have Matera and then Tauranga.
Thanks, Peter. Oh, sorry, Materi.
Oh,
Kia ora. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. If we go back down to the recommendation 2, and Juanita, can you zoom in a bit? My eyes aren't the same as they used to be a few years ago. Thank you. Where it says that decision to pause work on the Smart Growth Joint Spatial Plan. Now, my understanding, or the tangata whenua understanding, is that it also includes the iwi spatial plan. So does that also have to put the iwi spatial plan on pause as well?
That's not the intention.
Okay.
So in fact, quite the opposite. Putting all of the other work on pause enables it to be informed by the iwi spatial plan.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you, Anne.
Yeah, so that was actually my question as to where the iwi spatial plan featured and all of that. So thank you for that. And just to Jane, we are doing some work around the port. We're doing quite a lot, so we will be bringing that forward. So that's not going on hold.
Thank you. So we've got a set of recommendations that are all noting that have been moved and seconded. I'm going to put those. All in favour, please say aye.
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 The contrary, no. It's carried. Thank you. Which brings us to item 12, options for the ongoing role and structure of the Smart Growth Partner Forums. Kelvin, do you want to just talk to this before we go any further?
Yes, the review of the forums was previously something that was seen as desirable to do in conjunction with the development of the work program. It was also subject to a 2017 review report. So what I've done is brought together findings from the 2017 report plus a bit of an update context on what Smart Growth is currently challenged with, if you like, in terms of the operating environment that we have. You know, I note in the report that in the last 12 months, of 1 to 2 years, the focus on implementation has been reinforced. The partnership has expanded to include central government and a much more core part of the operation. And there's also an administrative and resource cost associated with operating Smart Growth forums, as has been the case in the past, but we're trying to basically balance those factors. And another important component of considering the future, you know, fit for purpose structure of the forums and how that might change compared to past practice is what is the SLG in particular, what is your desire and appetite for hearing the sub-regional voice through Smart Growth. So one of the lessons we actually got from the Wave Communications work was there is some confusion in the community, because they did some testing with the community on what is the role of Smart Growth versus the individual councils in leading the, you know, the voice and position of the individual councils. So there was some confusion that Smart Growth is perhaps bigger than what it actually is. It is not a united council, if you like. It is, so that's a factor that I think SLG in particular needs to be aware of, as in what at the core heart of Smart Growth, what do you need from a sub-regional community representation point of view? And the report acknowledges that the forums have been a central part of Smart Growth in the past, but there's also been a lot of activity from individual councils that has ramped up around communication and stakeholder engagement in recent years with things like LTP processes. And if you put that to one side, when we look at our work program, the main activity, the main action within our work program that will require full engagement process is the future development strategy. Whereas most of the rest of the program is about implementation, and I say that it includes funding, advocacy and applications and so on to address the funding gap, but it is very much being driven between working groups with council and central government people involved at that implementation level. So this report constructively provides options for the forums going forward, and obviously one of those options is status quo that can have modifications as well, but the two main change options are to reorganise and retain the Property Developers Forum and the Combined Tangata Whenua Forum for their own reasons, but to disestablish the other forums. And then there's a consolidate option. Sorry, the reorganise option is to also provide for an advisory group to be established consistent with the 2017 findings, where it would be a sub-regional platform that SmartGrowth has available to engage with on an ongoing, regular basis. The third option, the consolidate one, is to keep the two forums I mentioned and then leave flexibility for working groups as well as councils, writ large, to engage with community groups and set up advisory groups as needed in association with various projects and programs going forward. So it's a mixed option, but it essentially pulls back from SmartGrowth's infrastructure of forums, relies on the councils undertaking their own stakeholder and community engagement processes, and maintain those networks that SmartGrowth can benefit from where needed, i.e. the future development strategy going forward. So the report closes off by basically painting that picture of the options and suggesting we instigate consultation with the forum chairs to start with at the joint forum meeting on the 6th of December next week, and provide for feedback at the end of January, and then we will come back through the CAG and SLG meeting cycle in the first quarter of 2022 to bring this to you for final decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. So this has been through the Chief Executives Group, and the recommendation 2 reflects the view that the Chief Executives came to. So this is not something that Kelvin and I have cooked up. This has been considered by your Chief Executives and comes to you as a recommendation from them. I have Western Bay first, I think. And then Leda.
Who's going first, Doug or myself?
I think you are.
All right. Well, I think we look back on the process we used in 2013, and I think that went incredibly well, which was we had an open slather then where people could come along and put submissions in to the spatial plan as it was then. Once the overarching plan signed off, it's up to implementation. And I have been a proponent of this, that after SmartGrowth has been signed off, it then goes down to implementation, where we do the consultation via annual plan processes, plan change processes, policy plan processes at the individual entity level. And I think that's worked really well. I know from our council's point of view, we've done a lot of public consultation, and and I think that's what I'd like to see. So option 2, but slightly, well, I think you're saying it there, when we do the big review in 2017, that's when all of those forums should be tapped on the shoulder to say, get your groups together and come and submit, and we'll work out where from them. But once we sign off the smart growth, and I won't be part of it, so hopefully I'm unbiased at this stage, you'll have a document which then goes to the 4 partners to implement. And that's where the consultation happens at the detail level, out at the implementation organisation level. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Doug.
Well, thanks, Chair. Can I just clarify, is Mayor Webber promoting option 2 as opposed to what's in the recommendation, which is option 3?
I was about to ask the same question, Gary.
I'd like to go with option 2, but I know when it comes to the vote, it'll go to option 3 because there will be parties who will want to consult. But remember, we've spent a lot of money getting an independent review, which told us, and everybody was involved in that independent review. I'm comfortable to implement the independent review, but if you want to go around the houses again, well, I dare say that's fine. But, you know, we spent a lot of money on that review.
Okay.
Hey, thanks. Thanks, Peter. I'm just still not clear because even if we adopt option 2, it doesn't preclude step C in terms of the recommendation. But I'm happy with the recommendation as outlined in the papers. I think the paper was good. It was clinical in terms of its deliberations, and in recommending option 3, it's not a drop dead option in terms of what we've currently got, because you are offering the forums the opportunity during that period to come back to us before a final decision is made in February 22. That's right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So yeah, I'd support option 3. Consolidate option is recommended.
Thank you, Doug.
I think we're saying the same thing. If you look at the recommendation, I was talking to the point 2, which is consolidate recommended options. So it's I'm talking about the recommendations.
So Gary, are you saying that you are in support of recommendation 2?
Yes, which is option 3.
Right. Okay.
Excellent.
Sorry.
Very good. Thank you. So we're on the same page.
We are.
We'll go to Tauranga next, and then I'll come back to Councillor Nees.
Okay, it's Bill here, Peter. Probably just want, and my opening comment, I support the review. So, however, I'd just be interested for a response from you, Kelvin, in terms of process as to whether the forum chairs were provided with the report or there had been some engagement before this became public as part of the agenda.
Bill, the only previous engagement has been with Peter's conversations with some of the forums, I think back in August, but there was no joint forum meeting between now, then and next week, December 6th. So this report has gone to the joint forum meeting as the first chance to review it, to read it. There's been no forum meetings that we've inputted to or attended, just they haven't been held other than with the combined tangata whenua forum.
I'm not sure whether that answers my question, Kelvin, in terms of the forum chairs having been advised that this was going to be on the agenda for our consideration before it became public.
No, there has been no direct communication.
So I do have some difficulty with that, and I just need to put this on the table. The forum members and the forums have been around, some longer than others, obviously since 2001. We've had a lot of good input over a long period of time. Gary's referenced in terms of the input, for example, in 2016. So I'm concerned that we may have actually lost some goodwill in the process, and perhaps may not have been as respectful as we could have been in terms of the forums, and in particular the forum chairs. So I just needed to put that on the table, because that may make some of that subsequent engagement a wee bit more difficult going forward. And I'd also like to note, and I think in your report, Kelvin, you make comment about few meetings, but on the same theme, there was the impact of COVID, and some forums had actually tried to meet, and they weren't able to achieve that. So, and then my other concern is in terms of, it is important for that engagement as opposed to just relying on written submissions to be submitted by 21 January over the Christmas period, because I think there is that opportunity for some of that conversation. Can't necessarily always be given COVID face to face, but certainly that can occur virtually. So I'd just like to have those concerns on the table. And I also, when we get to the appropriate point, I'd also emailed Peter this morning in terms of some additional recommendations I'd like to have SLG consider. Thank you.
We'll come to that shortly, Bill. I have Councillor Nees next.
Thank you. Well, unfortunately, I'm going to throw a bomb in here, and I apologise to you, Doug, but you weren't at our briefing and our discussion yesterday afternoon about this agenda, and therefore didn't hear the views of the other regional councillors. So there was not support from the councillors from Bay Plenty Regional Council for the recommendation that's put forward, which is consolidate. In fact, there was consideration that SmartGrowth has actually failed to engage its public in the recent time, and that in the period when local democracy is under threat, that it's more than important than ever that we have integrated communication with our community over something as significant as SmartGrowth, which is about the future of our combined sub-regions. So the feeling of the regional councillors was, rather than go to the consolidate, which is actually removing the community a step further from having some sort of input, and I guess also reflecting that it has been very valuable input in the past. The support was more towards the to reorganise in Table 2, more in line with the recommendations from the 2017 recommendations. I also want to support the comments made by Bill that we have not treated the chairs with respect, and there's been a lot of very passionate people working for a very long time, giving their time freely to assist us to develop the vision for the future. And I wish that we hadn't put this report like this to them without any opportunity for them to comment and influence it. So I'm really sorry to have to take that stance, but I don't support the recommendation in the report at all. And I have to say that the majority of the regional councillors do not either.
Thank you, Councillor Nees. I have Ernst next.
Thanks, Peter. Look, all that aside, I think that we're moving into a period now where we're actually implementing OFD and the TSP. So we're in a different phase. So I think Kelvin's done a very good report. I know that from TCC's point of view, and it's mentioned in the option 3, we're working very closely now with EnviroHub. We have a partnership agreement with them. We're happy to work with Social Link to include those social aspects. And we've had some, we've already had a good collaborative meeting with the Housing Affordability Forum, and intend to continue that as we develop our policy around what we're going to be doing as a council to meet that gap. So I don't agree with Jane. I think that it is now the onus is on the individual councils as they implement the programs, the work programs that we have in front of us today, to maintain that public input. I agree with Jane that it's important, but I think we're far better off if, as we're implementing particularly at the TLA level, that we have a responsibility to be involving those various advocacy groups, because that's what they are. And I'm particularly interested in the housing. We've actually got, under SmartGrowth, we've got both the Housing Affordability Forum, now a Housing Action Plan working group. So we've got a doing group as well as an advisory group. And I think from TCC's perspective, we'd like to work much more closely with that advisory group and allow the SmartGrowth action group to get on with their role. We also have Kāinga Tupu, which we put a lot of support into. The DHB is supporting, and that's looking at more than just homelessness now. It's expanding its horizons. So I think there is a good opportunity for us to take those passionate people that Jane refers to and use them in a much more focused way as we implement the actions that are contained in our report, particularly in our PDAs.
Thank you, Anne. I've got Ernst and then Stuart.
Thank you, Peter. And I don't normally speak, so just a comment on behalf of the Minister, which she asked me just to pass on before she left. So it was just in relation to nervousness that any review just maintains and enhances the existing relationship to particularly housing networks. So the Housing Affordability Forum, which we found immensely valuable for collective, not organisational TA by TA sort of access and engagement, but where we have a collective housing action plans that we don't lose access. The lesson from all other place-based initiatives, the ministry and collectively we've all been involved in, is that we maintain and strengthen those networks. So just as this review happens, we just want to make sure that that doesn't happen, and there is a risk it may, and that would be really regrettable.
Thank you, Ernst. Stuart.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. In a way, it's carrying on what Ernst just said, is it's where the input is best placed. And if, for example, SmartGrowth is doing some form of spatial strategic review, and then, in my view, the forums should have an input at that very high level. But I also agree with Anne in terms of delivery. That is definitely at the Western Bay TCC level, and all the relationships that they have at the moment and hope to plan and grow. So it's just really where that input comes in, at what level. My observation has been over the years, often the joint forum members tend to input in too much detail at the strategic level rather than the operational level. And I'd like that conversation. And I think the process, I was initially worried yesterday when we discussed this, but the process you've got now in terms of engagement and whatever Bill might recommend, I think is a critical part moving forward. But just reiterate, it's where the input is best placed.
Thank you. Bill, we might come back to your proposed additional resolution.
Yes. Can we get that on the, the screen, Peter?
Yep, I think Juanita has that.
Can you? Oh, good.
She's been here before. Well, her first radio.
And if I can just give a wee bit of background, and whilst in option 3 does reference in terms of flexibility for other groups and that type of thing, it mentions EnviroHub and Social Link, I just felt we needed to get this well anchored in terms of resolution, and so this becomes a clear proposition that then is on the table for Kelvin and your subsequent engagement with at the joint forum hui, Peter. So that's why, in terms of giving consideration of how we actually use those existing entities to undertake some of the roles currently undertaken by the forum. So I use the terminology, the opportunity to morph what has existed perhaps into some of the more focused arrangements that are already in place. And I think Anne's raised in terms of some of the arrangements, for example, that Tauranga City has in respect of EnviroHub, connections with Social Link, Housing Affordability Forum, and whatever. And then the second part, the second paragraph is we have kind of tupu. There are forum members who have actually joined and engaged as part of that. So what are the opportunities, again, in terms of some of those existing arrangements? And I've already noted these opportunities should be part of the engagement. And the final recommendation addition is really just acknowledging that commitment and passion and input that's occurred over a long period of time. So I think this would add to those recommendations that are on page 66 of the agenda.
Thank you, Bill.
You're moving all of that.
So, Bill, are you happy to move 1 to 4?
Yes, yeah, I'm
1 to
happy on
5.
that day. Well, it's 1 to
1 to 5, rather.
1 to 5.
Yes.
Because it is a package.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Anne. Irene.
Sorry, put my mic on. Thank you for this opportunity to have this kōrero on behalf of the tangata whenua representatives, just in regards to some of the kōrero that has come before. And I just want to support the relationships that have been built over the years with these forums. Totally agree that probably the process and that we've moved to look at what the opportunities to improve and to make change and transition probably could have been done a little bit more respectfully. I do agree that it's good that we look at change, and especially in the current climate that we're moving into. I love the thought that we're moving in thinking about the implementation, but also ways that we're improving things on SmartGrowth. I think this is a good way that allows our forums to be more in the engine room with the implementation. I am hopeful that our forums will see this as a great opportunity. So I'm really in support of the change, and really in any way that tangata whenua who have stood alongside our forums, how we can also strengthen that, but also strengthen the huis that are going forward. And I just wanted again, just to say thank you for that opportunity to strengthen our processes and the way we are engaging to implement the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. I have Western Bay followed by Councillor Nees, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I think we need a process diagram here because I think we're getting confused again. At the review of the spatial plan, there is a real role for the different forums and also anybody else who wants to come in and submit on it, because at the strategic review of that, which is every sort of 3 to 5 years, that's where you need the input. after that, it goes to implementation. And the input, as Stuart was saying, the input is then at the implementation level. And I think there needs to be a diagram to explain what it is, because I know sitting through our own annual plan and long-term plan submissions, the people that come in to see us are far more, but also a duplicate in many instances of the people that come and talk to SmartGrowth. So to me, we have to separate out what is the role of the forum in terms of the review of the spatial plan, which is across the district, and then what is the role when we get into implementation, because I think that's where the confusion is. We're getting presentations at public forum where they really should be going to the implementation organisations, not the SmartGrowth, because SmartGrowth doesn't do any implementation. Hasn't got any funding to do these sorts of things. You can't really make any decisions. So I think we need that diagram so that people understand where the input is and what is it for.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Irene, I'm not sure whether you've got your hand up or down or back up again. Sorry, and Councillor Nees.
Oh, thank you. Look, I just want to echo and agree with Gary that when we're in the strategic phase developing the strategy, we need those forums. I wasn't debating perhaps not having a duplicate role during implementation. My focus is that when we're developing new strategy, or we are wanting some consultation on some strategy that we're thinking about, we need those forums to test that we're heading in the right direction. So I support what Gary's saying. I don't want to see the forums be written off and all that goodwill and knowledge and history disappeared completely. So, you know, if we can perhaps pick up on the recommendation here that Bill's putting forward while we're just focusing on implementation, that's fine. But I really do believe that we need a fit for purpose engagement platform when we're developing the strategy. So I don't think we're talking at cross purposes. I think that I agree with what Gary's saying. Once we move into developing SmartGrowth strategy, again, we really need a strong community platform to engage with.
I don't think that that is necessarily an inconsistent view with the recommendation, but I think the point of difference is whether we actually need the existing forums in their current shape, even for the strategy engagement, because certainly from the conversations that I had with the forum chairs, a number of them volunteered all by themselves the view that they thought that their existing forum had passed its use by date, and that there were other groups, and EnviroLink, or EnviroHub rather, was one of the ones that was mentioned, that would be a more effective group to engage with than the forum that they chaired. So I think we just need to make sure we've got horses for courses here. We have a suite of resolutions that has been moved and seconded. They're the 3 that are on the paper that you have, and 4 and 5 that are sitting in front of you. Are you comfortable that we move to put those recommendations, put that resolution rather? I'll put the 5 of them together. All of those in favour, please say yes.
Yes. Yep.
To the contrary, no. It's carried. Thank you. It takes us to item 13, the update on potable water.
Yeah, Peter, I'm happy to speak to this. So just by way of background, the city has 2 operational sources and treatment plants for potable water and 1 under construction, so in total 3. All of them are spring-fed streams reliant on the health of aquifers essentially for water flow. All three streams over the last 20 years have shown a steady but slow decline, but more recently all three have shown a more profound decline, to a point actually where it's concerning that if that decline continues without some sort of change, we will very quickly have severe water restrictions. So we've taken 3 steps. One is to initiate some immediate work with our Western Bay colleagues to look at how we can continue to supply over the next 1 to 2 summers. Obviously, we need to do some further work, and so we've established a sub-regional working group, very much in line with the TSP model, to think about strategic oversight and co-investment and future needs for the sub-region. And thirdly, there's a piece of work that we are looking at doing and extending around some research to understand what the impacts of climate change, seismic events, and horticulture and or water take is having on the aquifers as well. So this is really just an update to say that this is something that we're moving on reasonably quickly. It's concerning if we don't see some change, and that CAG and the sub-regional group will continue to report through updates to this group.
Thank you, Marty. So this is really just for us to note, really important piece of work and a pretty important issue. I have Western Bay.
Yeah, thanks. And we fully support this work. As Bill would know, and several others on the Waiari group, we passed a similar resolution at our last meeting. But I just want to make sure that we are taking a full catchment approach from the Mamakus to the Kaiamais right out, to make sure that we understand the aquifer availability. What is the recharge times? Hopefully the Regional Council have got a lot of this information, and how allocated are the current catchments to see is there any spare water available in these, to make sure that we really do this properly, because as Marty says, this is absolutely critical. Without water, there isn't a lot of life. So we've got to really sort this out and know what we're doing, and also understand the tangata whenua implications for where you take, when you take. So make sure the scope picks up all of those issues. We fully support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Me Weber. Is there any other comment around this? Councillor Needs.
Thank you. I just note that it's the Regional Council's responsibility to implement the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, and this is, you know, our bread and butter. So the Regional Council is very, very keen to be very involved in this process. We've got a lot of research, and we're already really doing a lot of thinking about this. We're also developing a plan change to implement the National Policy Statement for Freshwater, and there's going to be need for some really strong policy to provide alternatives to enable pressure to be taken off some of our water resources, for example, through the use of recapture and reuse of rainwater, water storage and things like that. So I do hope that it's a very strong partnership approach. I mentioned earlier on in the meeting that I felt that there was an urgent need to revisit a Western Bay water sustainability strategy, make sure that we've got all of the right information so that the right decisions can be made for the benefit of our communities going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Nees. Jeff.
Yes, look, I agree with you, Jane. Absolutely. I've had a philosophy about how we need to think about how we can bank water, capture it, and there are a couple of projects that are out there now doing exactly that, although albeit at a smaller level, but nevertheless, principally the rules are much the same. I'm pretty concerned about that what's happening from the top all the way down to Makatu and other areas. What's really happening underneath with our aquifers? How clean are they? Are we poisoning them and making them worse? So all that work needs to be done, and it is crucial. Pleased that you've made sure that iwi are involved with the Waiari, because they have there's a massive amount of passion there, both for today and of course culturally. But at the end of the day, I'm absolutely adamant that we've got to find ways to start banking and saving water. Yeah, it definitely is the new gold, no doubt about it. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you, Jeff.
Peter, I'm happy to move.
Thank you, Anne. And Gary might second that, since he's my serial seconder.
Yes, more than happy to second that.
Thank you. And for me, I just want to note the enthusiasm for the Regional Council to be involved, and not just as a regulator. This is the space where we need solutions that ensure that there is drinking water and there is health in the environment, and important that we all wear multiple hats when we come to the table. I'm going to put the resolution. All those in favour, please say yes. The contrary, no. It's agreed. Thank you. Which takes us to the last item on the agenda, the independent review of funding and financing in priority development areas. And I'm going to hand over to Kelvin, and he can introduce John as necessary.
Thank you. This is just a progress update, really, that previously SLG had signed off on the need for an independent review of what we've essentially lined up as our funding options for the priority development areas, and needing to identify alternative options, knowing there's limitations to what we've got currently available. So just to let you know, we've engaged John Williamson, who has significant experience with major projects in funding sources in the public sector and private sector as well. John will be doing this work over the December-January period, so we'll be reporting back in February through the cycle of SEAG and then to SLG in March. But it sort of answers some of the previous points on other items today, where if you think about the Eastern Town and the funding challenges that we're likely to come and encounter in that, as well as the PDAs carrying on as they are, and also other actions in the work program. So these things will come to a head in the new year, in that Q1 22, and we'll be able to catch up with each other on the funding dimension. So we've got John at the meeting just to really show his face and to give you the chance to reinforce any messages you'd like to give and suggestions to John to be aware of and take into account in his work. We've got John online.
Yeah, hey, Calvin. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, John. Have you got a camera on that we could just can put a face to a name? Welcome. Is happy for you to say anything by way of introduction, John, before we throw it open for questions.
Oh yeah, you should be able to see me. I'm coming up on my screen. I hope you can.
Yep, excellent.
I didn't want to say too much. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to do the review. I actually enjoy doing this sort of work, and I think it's incredibly useful. And I think the work that you're going to do here is going to be helpful not just for yourselves, but for others around New Zealand as well, because this isn't just your problem. This is a problem that you come, as you know, you come across in any location that's trying to manage the challenges of growth. So I didn't want to say too much myself. I was just more interested to know if there was anything that anybody had on the top of their mind that they might like to let me know, any questions or any sort of pointers of directions before I set off too deeply into the work.
Thank you, John. Western Bay, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I have. I think I was quite happy to move the recommendation, because all we've done is engage somebody to do the work. And rather than use the 38 experts, other than John who's sitting around the table, let him get on with the work and come back to us, and we'll work from there. So I was quite happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you, Gary. Do I have a seconder?
I'm happy to second it because we're also happy and want John to get on with it, and we look forward to his reporting back next year.
Fantastic. Is there anyone else prepared to venture anything at this point? No? I will put the recommendation then. All those in favour, please say yes.
Yes.
To the contrary, no. It's agreed. Thank you, John. That was the shortest steer that you'll get.
Thank you. Look forward to reporting back.
That brings us to the end of the agenda, unless there is anything else that anyone wishes to raise. No? Oh, Gary.
Gary Webber, Puiraki.
Oh, yes. Thank you. It would be appropriate, I think, for us to note the substantial and long service that Puiraki Ihaka has contributed to this committee over a number of years and over many, many years. I wonder, Bill, whether you might want to say a couple of words to note that service before we conclude the meeting.
Okay, no, thank you, Peter. And certainly when I first became involved in SmartGrowth, which was in the year 2000, so Puiraki, along with a number of others, were involved at that point in time. And certainly it was a very seminal approach in terms of how the governance operated, because Puiraki and others were around the governance table essentially from day one. And that was not easy to achieve, to be quite frank, in the environment that operated back 2 decades ago. And certainly Puiraki has been on that journey from that SmartGrowth perspective ever since then. So I really would like to acknowledge the contribution that Puiraki's made, and the thoughtful and considered way that he's actually contributed, and also then provided that advice. And certainly my years as independent chair, Puiraki, you've certainly always provided some of that advice below the radar, and certainly that's given me the confidence in terms of pursuing and progressing a range of initiatives. And now that I've changed roles, certainly it's been a pleasure to actually continue that engagement and involvement with you right up to the present day. So I'd really like to acknowledge that long contribution and how well that you've worked in that partnership arrangement, but at the same time making it very clear the perspectives of tangata whenua as we've progressed along in terms of that first strategy in 2004, the update in 2013, and then subsequent SmartGrowth initiatives. So, you know, really, and it's been a pleasure in terms of working with you.
Thank you, Bill. Gary.
No, that was my lot. Thanks. Just reminding you to close that off before we close the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bill. Jeff.
I just want to be sure for te u o te waka te aroa ki uta ki tai. I've been voting like I'm a member. Can I now officially presume that I am a member?
You are absolutely, and you have been since the moment they concluded the appointment. So absolutely, and Puiraki is not with us. I just thought it was appropriate, given his long service, that we recognise the contribution that he has made, which we'll note in the minutes.
Kia ora tātou.
Thank you. On that note, Te Pio, I wonder if I might call upon you to close our proceedings. Indeed, he's still with us.
Kia ora, Peter, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Ka pai. Ai, tuatahi e mihi nei kia koe hoki Bill, e tuku nei nā kōrero rangatira hoki nei i tā tātou nei rangatira a Puhirake, tai atu nei ki tāna timatatanga ki tēnei huarahi, i tā taho nei a Maru Tapso, Ruruanga Te Kēti, ara hoki nei i tā tātou nei pāpā mai piri rākau a Peter. Nō reira na mihi kawana hoki nei kia rātau, hoi anō kia tātou nei i tēnei haura, nō reira tēnā tātou. Nō reira e te atua ka tata mai hoki nei te wā kia oti pai, kia oti tika hoki nei ki tēnei huinga. Kia tātou nei, kia whiriwhiri rā i nā huarahi e pāna hoki nei kia tātou nei, e noho haumaru ai ki roto nei ki tēnei takiwā hoki nei. Mai o tā whiwhi ki o te marākau, kia tātou nei, ki tauranga mōna kei wainga nui, aro hoki nei i tā tātou nei whānau hoki, a te arawa waka mai makatū ki Tongariro, tēnei hoki rā kia mātou nei, e mihi nei, e tukuna nei ki tēnei ino atu nei ki a koe, e te atua, kai raro hoki te ingoa tō maitia, hi praiti monoa ake tono atu, āmene, kia ora tātou.
Āmene.
Amen. Thank you. Go well.